Just about 10 minutes ago, while we were in that last segment talking to Congressman Clyde, the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, came out of his meeting with President Biden, and this is what he had to say.
Everybody in this meeting reiterated the positions they were at. I didn't see any new movement. The president said the staff should get back together, but I was very clear with the president. We have now just 2 weeks to go.
All right, there you have it. President not moving. Well, he's going to have to. We'll keep tracking the developments here as we talk with members and staff who are involved in the negotiations. All right, I've discussed on this program recently that the state of Montana passed a law. One of about a dozen states, actually a few more than a dozen states, I think about 13, have passed laws to protect children from experimental gender treatments. Now, this includes puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and mutilating surgeries. Now, it's an encouraging trend to see state lawmakers boldly taking steps to protect children against the cultural tides. It was also interesting yesterday in the Washington Post, a poll that they conducted that shows that the vast majority of Americans do not agree with what is taking place with this push for transgendering children. And so these lawmakers, they know where the people are. Well, earlier today, the American Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit attempting to overturn the law in Montana. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the Montana Attorney General, Austin Knudsen, who plans to defend the state law in court. Attorney General Knudsen, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
So this is Montana's not alone in this. You've got, as I said, about a dozen states that have passed laws like this. Are you surprised that the ACLU has chosen Montana to challenge?
Not surprised at all. The ACLU has had a dismal track record lobbying up at the Montana legislature this session. It was kind of the butt of our jokes here in our office that if the ACLU came in against our DOJ legislation, we were probably going to gain 5 or 6 more votes. But look, we've got a very liberal judiciary in Montana. The ACLU knows this. They no longer control the executive branches. They no longer control the legislative branches. So they know they've got a very liberal judiciary. They're hoping they can run to their friends on the court here in Montana and get the will of the legislature overturned here.
As I mentioned, a poll just released yesterday, a survey of the American people. 68% of Americans oppose puberty blocking medication in children ages 10 to 14. 58% oppose hormonal treatments for teens 15 to 17. Montanans overwhelmingly support protecting children as well, which was evidenced by the legislature. So, I mean, they think they're going to get their friends on the court to basically trample upon the will of the people?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's what you and I call common sense, right? I mean, when 70% of Americans agree with what most of us consider a barbaric practice is exactly that, barbaric, and that's grounds for the legislature to step in. I mean, there's a compelling state interest here that's narrowly tailored, and I'm using legal language because that's what we'll have to do here. We'll have to step in and show that there's a compelling state interest here in regulating this kind of medical procedure. I think we can clearly do that. The state legislature obviously has an interest in protecting young, non-able to consent minors from this kind of barbaric surgery. There are exceptions built into this law, of course, but for the most part, this is banning exactly the kind of activity that has gotten a lot of attention, and that as I said, I think there's a compelling state interest to do, and Montanans recognize that, as do all Americans.
So General Knudsen, I know that the suit was just filed today, but what's the general basis of the ACLU's approach here? What are they claiming the state does not have the right to do?
Well, it's an interesting lawsuit. I haven't gone through it with a fine tooth comb, but I did have time to go through it. It's a 60+ page complaint, full of a lot of hyperbole, full of a lot of slandering of legislators, which is not surprising given the ACLU. But look, boiled right down, They're making an equal protection claim under the Montana Constitution. They're making a right to privacy claim, which is interesting because they're trying to shoestrap onto our state's abortion Supreme Court ruling. That's the Armstrong case. It was a very poorly written, very controversial Supreme Court ruling that came out in our state in 1999, where basically one justice wrote into an opinion the right to privacy, guaranteeing the right to an abortion in Montana. Extremely controversial. But what's interesting about the arguments the ACLU is making here is they seem to be relying very heavily on that case to argue that quote unquote right to an abortion through privacy also would apply to this non-existent right to undergo these kinds of radical surgeries. There's that. The other one I think is really interesting is they're making a freedom of speech claim here. And I'm not sure what parents being able to consent to mutilating their children has to do with their freedom of expression. That's going to be an interesting one to have the ACLU lawyers explain to us in court here in Missoula when we get there. But that's kind of the case boiled down and distilled.
I mean, there's, and I'm not extremely familiar with Montana's laws but I am with my home state of Louisiana, where I served in the legislature, where there's all kinds of restrictions on what you can do under the age of 18. You can't, under 16, you can't drive. You have, some states absolutely say you can't get a tattoo. You've got to get parental rights for parental permission for certain things. So, I mean, this is something that's irreversible. This is just common sense to me.
Again, there's that term. It's a term that most of us understand. I agree with you. It is common sense, but it's one that apparently ACLU and a handful of these radical medical providers here in Montana just can't get their head around, and want to just keep shoehorning this down all of our throats.
Right.
I mean, it's barbaric.
Yeah.
And there's just not a better term for it. But you're exactly right. I mean, my teenage kids can't get an aspirin from their school without my consent.
Yeah.
But we want to create this environment where they can suddenly feel that because their body is changing,
Right.
that they can go, that they should be able to go in and undergo a radical, non-reversible.
Right. That's the key.